The board has been in closed session, and so we have to certify that we're properly in closed session. So I move that the members of the county board certify that at the just concluded closed session, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under Chapter 37, Title 2.2 of the Code of Virginia, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. DeFerranti?
Aye.
Ms. Crystal?
Aye.
Ms. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Dorsey?
Yes.
Mr. Carantonis?
Yes.
The closed session that motion passes, and the closed session has now been certified. So this afternoon, we are having a work session that colleagues, and I suspect everyone in the room will know, very excited about this opportunity to have a discussion about and really recognize work that our Department of Human Services has been doing with our safety net nonprofits. It's the Bridges Out of Poverty work session. We'll receive a presentation. It reflects the culmination of some great work that's been going on for a number of years since 2016, and it's about helping some of our neighbors most in need and facing the most challenges. It's different than some other county board work sessions. There's no direct action coming from this work session. We're here to celebrate the work that has occurred and learn from the body of work and see what we can glean from it. And now over to you, Mark, Mr. Schwartz, for the opening remarks and today's presenters. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Really excited. We're going to have the opportunity to hear from the Community Foundation today and the Department of Human Services. As you've noted, the Department of Human Services, I remember Anita coming in 2016 and making that first presentation on the Bridges Out of Poverty. And I wanted to just take a second to introduce the presenters today. We have Anita Friedman, our DHS Director. Brooke Hammond-Perez, who I think is with us virtually today. Michael Dharma-Irwin, our Quality Assurance Specialist with DHS. We also have, let's see, Dina Abdelghani over here, our Community Outreach Specialist, who works at Harvey Hall, and she's been with the county for 7 years and is one better than bilingual. She's trilingual, and has been playing a huge part. And then, of course, Ann Vertebrugge, who's the Director of Grants and Initiatives and in charge of cajoling with the Arlington Community Foundation. So over to you, Anita.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, and thank you, members of the County Board, for this opportunity to present 5 years of work that has been conducted between the Department of Human Services, the Arlington Community Foundation, and a broad coalition of safety net nonprofits. Our partnership began in 2016, where we received training in a methodology called Bridges Out of Poverty. And we sat down with the Community Foundation leadership and the safety net leadership, and we said, we need a new way to do our work together. We need a new way to address systemic poverty in Arlington. Poverty is not a moral failing, and the systems that we had in place tended to be paternalistic and transactional in nature. And we wanted to focus our work on the relationships that we had to strengthen not just the interaction between the government and the private sector, nonprofit sector, but the relationship between the service providers and the constituents who are coming to us for services. One of the formative overarching beliefs that we hold is that economic mobility is not just about increasing income and assets. Of course, that's necessary, especially when you're living in a place like Arlington, but coming out of poverty involves gaining greater control over one's life and one's family's life, creating opportunities. and developing a sense of belonging in the community. And that's really where we have emphasized our strong partnership. Next slide. So we know that poverty exists in Arlington. Obviously, the county board and the public of Arlington has generously supported the safety net nonprofits for many years. We can quantify for you in numbers of households and income levels who are classified as people living in poverty. You know that in Arlington, the perception is that we are an overwhelmingly wealthy community. A family of 4, the area median income in 2021 was $129,000 per year. The people that the Department of Human Services and the Social Safety Net works with are people who are living at 30% or below area median income, which for a family of 4 is $38,700. Imagine living in Arlington on that level of income. And there are 25,000 individuals or 10,000 households in Arlington who are living at this level of poverty. We also know down to basically the neighborhood and the census tract, exactly where people are living. It's not a mystery. There was a very formative report published by Stephen Wolf at from Virginia Commonwealth University and proliferated by the Northern Virginia Health Foundation called The Uneven Opportunity Landscape in Northern Virginia. If you see here, and there's a split really between North and South Arlington, that there are certain neighborhoods in South Arlington that have very high levels of people living below federal poverty level, without health insurance, severely housing burdened, and they're overwhelmingly Black and Hispanic. And this comes into stark contrast when you look at some of the other neighborhoods where we know that people are really doing well, and they're much different demographically. I would like to bring up my colleague, Ann Vorderbrugge, to discuss how Bridges Out of Poverty got started and what was involved.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's an honor to work with DHS, all of you. And it's been a really amazing experience at the Community Foundation to see this incredible collaboration across the nonprofits and DHS and the foundation and the Community Foundation. So I just want to say really quickly why in the world is the Community Foundation even
You may want to just
closer?
lean in. Yeah.
Why the Community Foundation is even interested or in investing our time and effort in this work. People know that the Community Foundation gives out grants and scholarships, but a significant role that we play, like other community foundations, is to provide leadership around critical community issues. And we are very concerned about the affordability pressures in Arlington and believe that there's a moral and an economic imperative to look at that in terms of the health of our community and its viability. Those statistics that Anita just showed, many of those are our essential workers, low-wage workers who are in our food stores and retail and childcare workers and so forth. So we, as a foundation, we really want to see Arlington as a place where everyone is valued and everyone belongs. We are able to bring some pretty significant research partners into this work and our own personal in-house interest and expertise in collective impact. We have a real appreciation for the importance of public-private partnership, with which this is a shining example. And we also are interested in doing demonstrations on a smaller scale of things that might be worth scaling up. So here we are at the Bridges Out of Poverty work. And as Anita said, the idea was to make and is to make the safety net system more effective in helping people move out of poverty. And she's already described the partners. We also have the Urban Institute along for the ride as a helping with the design along the way. So we spent about 2.5 years learning as a community. This is a picture of one of our learning days, and it's an incredible assembly of frontline staff and leaders across the human service safety net in Arlington. We had about 6 days like this, and over time we had about 300 people trained so that we could share a common language around mobility from poverty and learn where there are bottlenecks in the system and how we could improve our relationships with each other and then our relationships with the people we serve. So we looked at things like the concept of what brain science shows us around the toxic stress of poverty and being caught in the tyranny of the current moment. Just so wrapped up in today's crisis that it's hard to lift up your head and look forward. We, over time, after examining these things and identifying some key bottlenecks, we made some real adjustments. We came up with a multi-use or multi-party shared release form that's HIPAA compliant. I know you've heard about that over the years, and it's really been transformative because now nonprofits, the hospital, the county, and the schools can share information. We aren't asking people to come in one office after another and fill out one form after another. Many organizations involved changed their office hours to be more flexible, to be open at night, to allow children into the appointments. DHS opened up same-day access for mental health services. We really emphasized the idea of warm handoffs, meaning instead of just a number to call, we actually, one resource person would introduce a client or a resident to the resource in person or on their behalf. So what we found over time was that we felt we had something good going on and we wanted to test that. And that's when we launched this 200 Bridges pilot. Are you going to take over, Anita?
Yeah.
True tag team here.
Sorry.
It's good.
So once we had defined a common language and reduced some of our internal bureaucracy so that from a resident's perspective, they were not necessarily negotiating and reliving their story at every instance, we decided to do a pilot to apply the systemic changes on a household level. And we developed this in collaboration with the Urban Institute and a smaller group of nonprofits. But in there we had even housing agencies, for example, like AHC and APA. We had Pediatric Center. We looked at what are the key areas in a person's life where they really get stuck and can't move forward on their own. So what we did is, looking at different national models, we identified something called the Arizona Self-Sufficiency Matrix, which assesses individuals and households along many different life domains. We chose 12 of them, things like access to health care, access to jobs, access to child care, but also things like a sense of community belonging, also the presence of adult role models in a child's life. So there was not just sort of quantitative aspects, but also qualitative aspects about how we believed people coming out of poverty and gaining economic mobility would thrive. We applied this system-level change with 200 families. Now, we haven't quite reached that 200 number because it's very intensive work, but we used we basically recruited staff from all across the nonprofits and within Department of Human Services to create multidisciplinary teams, which Michael Dharma is going to tell you about, who took on cases of families, and I think we were up to 100 and...
Actually, just
90 families. And over time, beginning at the initiation, assess them across these 12 life domains, and then at different intervals, 6 months typically, which Michael Dharma will show you the results of these, assessed how they were progressing along the life domains. Michael Dharma?
Oh, need a microphone.
Thank you. That one's for me. All right. Thank you, Anita. So how 200 Bridges works, there are two key components to this model. One is a single trusted point of contact. And as Anita said, those trusted points of contact came from all over our system of care. Some were DHS workers who were used to navigating the system. Others might be staff from the pediatric center or neighborhood health, a group that has less experience working outside of the healthcare domain. We had housing providers at the table. All of them were trained to do a holistic assessment of a family's needs, looking both at what's their immediate goals and what are their long-term goals, using the Arizona assessment that Anita mentioned, as well as discussion with the family to clarify what their goals are. They help the families connect resources across all those domains and agencies. And we'll talk about how the multidisciplinary case review team helped them do that. And they also share the family's needs with the case review team. So each quarter, the trusted point of contact assessed the family's needs, completed the Arizona, and met with the case review team to present their case and access resources. The case review team was really a very comprehensive construct. We had representatives from housing, from state benefits, from legal assistance, healthcare, behavioral health, children's services, adult education, workforce development. Not every family needed all those domains, but many of them needed help in more than one. The teams met with the point of contact to troubleshoot systemic barriers. And that could be something as simple as looking up the family's case real time in the meeting, figuring out where their benefits application was stuck, and addressing that bottleneck. It could also be long-term issues. We were able to identify some systemic barriers that were affecting many families and work on processes to address them. The meetings always focused on the family's current goals and the action items that would help them address them. We wanted the family's voice and priorities to drive this process. And as Anita mentioned, warm handoffs were a key component of the process. Not just telling the family, call the employment center, but go see Jonathan at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, and he'll help you make this connection. This is a picture of some of the faces behind the work. And again, you'll see representatives there from many organizations. And this is one of the many meetings they had to learn, coordinate, and share lessons learned together. The next couple of slides, I'll be introducing some of the outcomes of this work. As Anita mentioned, we have a quarterly assessment based on the Arizona Self-Sufficiency Matrix. The numbers that I'm going to show you are based on individual timelines. So we didn't assess every family in February. We assessed families at their own initial enrollment, 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months mark. Therefore, this data covers a wide period of time, ranging from 2019 to 2021. But these are some of the key domains where we saw changes at various intervals. The 6-month interval is a very short time period, but I think the two results that we're sharing are quite interesting. The first is health insurance. At enrollment, less than half of people in our program had health insurance already in place. At 6 months, almost 60% said that they did. Usually, this involved connecting families to Medicaid or to health exchange plans. This was a relatively quick process, but clearly those resources weren't accessible to all. So again, at that 6-month mark, only 60% said that they had health insurance. That's interesting compared to the next chart, which shows whether or not they had access to health care. That question is asking, do all family members have access to care when they need it? And at first, just over half reported they did. At 6 months, 76% said they did. The key there was, as part of this 200 Bridges team, we had neighborhood health, Arlington Free Clinic, Virginia Hospital Center, all kinds of partners who can serve families regardless of insurance status. So I think we see here what a difference it made having those groups at the table in terms of connecting families to resources. At 12 months, the item that we're highlighting is employment. The question we were asking here is, do all family members who need a job have one and keep it for at least 6 months? So clearly you won't see progress there in 6 months. But at the 1-year mark, they went from initially less than half of families having employment to, at 12 months, 64% having all family members have employment. That's quite a high bar, but it's very impressive that they were able to achieve it. And again, we had the Arlington Employment Center at the table. We also had adult education providers like REAP who could help families build those skills to achieve the sustained career growth that they needed. 18 months is a longer time frame, and not all families remained enrolled in the program that long. But for those who did, some of the key measures where we saw growth are the following. One is social capital. The question that we ask is, do all the adults in the family have mutually supportive connections? People they can turn to, people they can help, community involvement. Initially, less than half reported that they had those connections, whereas at 18 months, 70% had those connections. We think part of the reason why it took so long to see that result change is because families were able to grow in this domain after their basic needs were met. Once they had a job, they had access to health care, they had food security, and those needs were in place, they could spend more of their bandwidth on developing their community connections. Access to childcare, initially just over half had access, and we know from other work that availability and affordability are a challenge in Arlington, particularly for families at this income level. But nonetheless, at 18 months, 75% reported they had access through means such as the child care subsidy and other resources we were able to connect them to. And the last one, maintaining housing. The question we asked here was, is the family in safe, stable housing for at least 6 months? Initially, the majority of families said yes, but by 18 months, those who were still enrolled, all of them said yes. And a key challenge, I think, for this group, why they didn't all have that stable housing initially, was the availability of large units for large families. A lot of them had to move multiple times before they found just the right place. The next slide that I want to share shows some of the impacts of COVID on our families. Clearly, 200 Bridges started before COVID, worked through COVID, and is still in place now. And what we're highlighting here are some of the domains where we saw changes at the onset of COVID in those assessments that we completed between March of 2020 and July of 2020. And we compare them in these charts to the most recent assessment for those families, the assessment that they completed between August of 2020 and the current time. Two areas where we saw initial negative impacts and then rapid improvement. One was food security. The question we ask here is, did any family member skip meals due to lack of food? And at first, only 60% of families could say that no family members were skipping meals. Clearly, at the beginning of COVID, we had job loss. We had more family members staying at home. We had families who were unable to get out due to fear of going out in public places. So we saw a significant impact right away. On the most recent assessment, however, 85% of families were able to answer this question affirmatively, due primarily to the county's food security resources and all the efforts that have been put in place to stabilize people during this crisis. The other item that we highlighted here is social capital. Again, those connections for adult family members. At the beginning of COVID, half of families reported that they didn't have that social capital due to the isolation, the sudden severing of connections. But our families are resilient. And at their most recent assessment, 70% had those connections, using digital connections, using other resources that have been put in place since then. We also wanted to share two domains where we're seeing ongoing challenges, where we saw a significant negative impact at the beginning of COVID, and it has not yet recovered. One is employment, keeping a job for 6 months. At the onset of COVID, under 60% of families reported that they had that stable job when we had high unemployment, especially in frontline service jobs and gig work. At the most recent assessment, only 44% had that stable employment. So even though our unemployment rate is down, not all the kinds of jobs these families rely on have recovered. And we also have families who still have been unable to go back to work because of childcare challenges, needing to stay home with their children when schools were out. The other item we highlighted is behavioral health and disabilities. We ask, can the family say that these disabilities have minimal impact on their life? And at the beginning of COVID, most families said it had minimal impact. It was the beginning of the pandemic. People thought that there was light at the end of the tunnel. More recently, fewer families are able to report minimal impact. And we think that's due mostly to the chronic stress that people across the community have experienced, but especially people who are struggling with basic needs to address their families' requirements. I'd like to turn it over to Anita to introduce our next presenter.
Yes, we have our guest tonight is Dina Abdelghani, who is one of our key community outreach workers. She's been with the county for 7 years. She's a human services specialist. She works out of Harvey Hall and Woodbury Park. She is, as Mark mentioned, trilingual, English, French, and Arabic, and she's going to give you the on-the-ground story of her experience as a point of contact working with families in this program. Thank you, Dina.
So there's a button. Perfect. There you go.
Good afternoon, and I'm happy and honored to be given this opportunity to present in front of all of you. My name is Dina Abdelghani, and I had been working with community outreach program for the last 7 years. Our goal is to enhance families' abilities to be self-sustained and to be productive members of our community. Today, I would like to talk about one of my clients who worked very hard and has come a long way. They are a family of 5, and I enrolled them 3 years ago to Bridges Out of Poverty program. Their goal were to be out of public assistance and to gain self-financial independency. The client used to drive a taxi and was not able to cover all his family expenses. I enrolled him at Housing Grant Program and connected him to Arlington Employment Center to look for a better opportunity. AAC was able to provide funding for the commercial driving license training, and he recently passed the test and is looking for another job at one of the transportation companies. As for the client's wife, she was a homestay mom due to her language barriers. I assisted her to enroll her twins at Virginia preschool program so she can be able to attend REAP classes. And once she's done with all its level, she joined the GED classes. And now her goal is to have an IT job. And recently she's attending a 6-month course on software programming. The family has received the 200 grocery gift card, and now they are enrolled at the Arlington Guarantee Program, which will provide them $500 for 18 months. And they are planning to use some of this money to pay for the IT certificate. It's a great pleasure and personal satisfaction that through all of our support, the family is working towards achieving their goals, and they are on the right track on self-sufficiency and improving their livelihoods. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abdelghani. Go ahead.
So now we have time for some questions, if we're just taking a pause, since it's a multifaceted presentation. If you have any questions about the partnership, Bridges Out of Poverty, 200 Bridges, any particulars as to how our work is continuing?
Sure, so I'll offer one that's pretty tactical. It's, I think it can mean different things different times, but a warm handoff seems to me could mean a joint phone call or perhaps an email. In my world, though, two people on an email doesn't feel very warm. So in person, and you mentioned the example, I think Michael Dharma of Ms. Arun of the go to this person, maybe that was at 7 o'clock the next night. Can you kind of describe what makes it to warm handoff and what is not quite good enough?
Well, I think the key, it is very labor intensive. So there is, when you think about the fact that we have tens of thousands of people who are living in poverty, the question arises as to how to scale this up, because it's very labor intensive and time intensive for people to come around in pre-COVID personally, face-to-face around a table with the person who best knows that family's case and to explain in detail what exactly that family needs. And the energy, I think, of having all of the different people represented from a multitude of agencies creates a sort of a sense of urgency to get things done immediately. And so the warm handoff is not just necessarily, hey, can you help me with getting this person enrolled in Arlington Free Clinic? But there's a face-to-face so that the person working in housing knows who the person in Arlington Free Clinic is, knows their phone number, knows their email address, and will bring that information to the family to schedule either an appointment, begin the application process to help them. It goes beyond just the handoff. It goes into actually getting them into a program or a service. You want to add anything? Or Ann?
Can I just talk loudly?
No, come over here.
Thank you.
Hopes for the recording. Okay. Sorry. I just want to add, I don't think this was covered yet, but we have seen across this rather, smallish group, 45 or so case reviewers, that the impacts here are multiplied many times over because they're learning about each other. People within DHS are learning about other things going on and who they are in DHS and in the community, and vice versa. So they all frequently comment that they have taken what they've learned, gotten tips out of these specific case reviews. Sometimes someone like Dina will be there to present their family, but they stick around and get to hear another brainstorming session so that they can share resources and ideas. It's very collaborative, and so that the warm handoffs continue beyond just the context of those single meetings.
Great. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Ms. Sermon?
I would just say in answer to your specific question, the answer is kind of all of the above. It depends on the needs of the case. So there are cases where it will be, we walk them across the hall to meet with a colleague. It will be, either can be a case where it's a phone call, an email, giving them an appointment. It depends on the needs of the family and the resources available.
Got it. Great. Colleagues, questions? Ms.
I can go.
Mr.
First
Go
of all, thank you so much for the presentation and for showing that, you know, the achievements, actually, what transdepartmental interdisciplinarity and actually concentrating the delivery system and building that, you know, around common goals is delivering. I have one question. It has to do with a dimension that I am always concerned about. And as an immigrant, I must know that. So it's about the resiliency in the long term. So, for example, you show amazing improvement in health insurance rates. But I know that in the country we live, this can turn on a dime. The moment that you lose your employment, for example, that you show in the next page, that's a challenge. So how do we deal with that? How do we build in resiliency? Because one of the goals of any delivery of a social safety net is to create this predictability, create this minimum, you know, solid base. So how do we do that?
I think that's a great point and definitely something that we've considered in the design of this. Things like health insurance, by connecting someone to Medicaid, it's a program that will meet their needs long term. Wherever possible, we do try to connect people to sustainable resources. But as you pointed out from the COVID slide, there can be crises that occur that will change that. You know, the percentage of people who achieved employment was quite high at 12 months, but then when COVID happened, it went right back down. And I think it sort of plays into the next part of our presentation, which is about going beyond connecting people to the minimum supports and trying to help build resilience and additional resources. But I don't know, Anna or Anita, is there anything else that you would add?
Just adding on that the fact that the immediate action items, we end every case review meeting with a set of action items and come back to that sort of for accountability. And having some of these immediate needs taken care of does build bandwidth to build resiliency and to build the opportunity to sort of think ahead and then start to tap longer term resources. So, but I think what you're getting at is also a larger policy discussion, which is really an important one nationally, obviously outside of our complete control.
Sure.
So,
thank you.
Two answers that both lead to what's next. So go ahead, Ms. Crystal, and then we'll come back. Maybe the rest of the presentation, you can ask that again.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the excellent presentation and the multiple angles on it, from community partners to the provision of that intensive casework to the data analytics. It's really interesting. Two questions, one very philosophical and one super technical. To go to the big picture first, one of the things I sort of noticed from comments that we heard from both Ms. Abdelghani and Ms. Irwin is, Ms. Abdelghani, you described the family making the decision that the mother, I think, had barriers to employment. So she was maybe home with her children, but this was a stepping stone, or the program could help her get them in care so that she could pursue. And then Ms. Irwin used the great phrase of all adults who want employment in the household. And I've been thinking about this a lot. This is something I know we wrestled with the child care initiative, right? That question of wanting to ensure that there's affordable, accessible childcare for all who want it, right? And how do we measure the fact that knowing, and this is true across cultures and incomes, right? Some families are going to want to make that choice, especially in the early years, to stay home with their children. This is so philosophical, even at the federal level, right? When we look at the child income tax credits that are being discussed. But my question for us is, how, if at all, do we measure that? So that we're not assuming that, for example, 100% employment of all adults in a home or 100% of children in childcare is the goal, when we know for some families they won't want that. And yet we do want those families to be stable and have reliable access to healthcare, food assistance, and stable housing. Have you grappled with that? And how, if at all, do we factor that into our measurement?
No, that is an excellent question. I don't think we have a quantifiable answer to that at this point. But I will say that part of the emphasis of this program has been the conversations between the point of contact and the family to clarify what it is that family wants. So that even if we don't have a data point to report on, we have that conversation at the case review team to say, what are the family's goals? Do they want employment now? Okay, they're staying home with their child. Do they want to further education while they're doing that? So clarifying on an individual basis what those families' goals are. But I don't think at this point we have a roll-up that tells us big picture across the system where families are landing.
So possibly some really interesting qualitative data and stories, which are so powerful, as Ms. Abdelghani's example showed us, right? That's really interesting. My tactical question is one possibly for our Director of Human Services, Ms. Freeman, or maybe for others. I'm thinking about one of the things that sounds really exciting to me about this model and this kind of learning together across agencies is this sort of notion that you could have folks and forgive me and correct me if I'm overspeaking, but it's the kind of right folks can flex into that intensive casework, one trusted contact. And it sounds like sometimes that might be somebody with DHS, sometimes it might be somebody with a community-based nonprofit. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot, I think the pandemic has really exacerbated a tension that's sort of always been there, is, Arlington spends a lot, as we should, right? To the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars on housing and human services supports, and that's the right priority. And yet, I know there's always this sense among our nonprofit partners that it's not enough and that they're sort of underfunded in the work they do. And I think one of the phenomena I've observed from talking to folks is this sort of sense that every organization is compelled, because of the need they see in the communities they serve, to do casework. And so how do we make sure that casework is done as effectively as possible, but preferably by not 3 different people? That you ideally wouldn't have a caseworker who's a staffer at DHS and a case, with a nonprofit and maybe another caseworker informally in the community. Have we learned anything from this pilot about, how to effectively flex people in and out of that casework to give us hope that there could be ways to kind of better calibrate the right partnership and balance of contract caseworkers embedded with nonprofits, caseworkers within DHS, or is this sort of kind of always going to be a challenge that's with us?
Well, I think that your question really hits on the on something that I grapple with every day, because we have, let's say, 30,000 clients coming to the Department of Human Services, 700 staff, and 145 programs. How do you integrate that? In fact, Michael Dharma and I and Caitlin Hutchinson, and Glenda Pittman are all involved in a Kresge Foundation National Human Services Integration Project, where we're meeting with other departments, some from California, like Solano and Alameda counties, Hennepin County, Montgomery counties, and there were 5 of us who were selected, who are further along on the human services integration spectrum than most counties in the U.S., but still not quite there. One of the Achilles heels, actually, for many of us is data integration and data sharing. And now we're in another pilot. we get invited into these other technical assistance groups, Stewards of Change, which has a national interoperability collaborative. And that is the question for all of human services. You need, in a human services environment, you need to have experts in specific domains, and we hire people for that expertise, right? We want the best mental health therapists. We want the most qualified eligibility worker to get those benefits that are accurate and timely. But as we say in our staff orientation, we didn't hire you just for that. Everyone we bring in, we tell them, your job is to look holistically at a family and not just stay in your lane, but to actually learn what this department and what this community has to offer. And we have a number of electronic systems that we've developed over time. We have something called the Program Directory. We have something now called the Social Services Wiki, which we've given, it's a community-sourced directory of all of the services across all these domains that the nonprofits can now access. But we don't have the level of data integration where you can automatically look up and with a few clicks, oh, so-and-so is connected to X, Y, and Z, and so therefore we know those are covered. But even data is not the solution in and of itself. It definitely helps. The relationships and the knowledge sharing that I think Ann mentioned is key. It's just a matter of how you can scale that up to a level in which, you know, it can be available to everyone. So.
Well, that's the second time we've heard scaling up, and I know there'll be more questions
Mr. Chair,
along
might
those
I
lines. Go ahead,
just on
Ms.
this
Garvey.
one, yeah, just a quick, and it's just sort of following up on all of this, because I just, you know, when you describe the team approach and the single point, I mean, it's just like, well, that's common sense. I mean, you know, it's just, and it's wonderful to see common sense kind of infused here. I found myself thinking that these meetings might, one, make it more holistic on how we handle people, but maybe have some side benefits. One is, I would assume over time, it's very time intensive, but I'm guessing people keep learning, and so they start to be doing things faster because they've learned it, so that you're going to increase the efficiency as we move forward, which is great. And then I am guessing, and I'd love your feedback on this, that it's going to increase the satisfaction of the folks working in these fields because they're able to be much more effective and they feel like they have community support. So I see head nods. I'll stop talking if you want to talk, because I think that's really crucial, because we need to keep attracting people to these fields, and we need people to feel like they're being effective, because that's why they do this work. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that satisfaction is not just that you've, you know, provided your own expertise, it's that you're surrounded by a community of other co-workers and colleagues who have the same dedication and goals of providing resources to the family, and that it's very, I think, very gratifying.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for really sharing this important work with us. A couple of initial questions. Really appreciate the work around HIPAA-compliant universal intake processes. I'm probably not using the correct term, but that's at least how I internalized it. You know, a barrier to people even engaging in seeking help and support is needing to relive trauma over and over again, hoping that the person on the other end gets it. So I do appreciate that, but at the same time, I'm wondering if it exposes any potential vulnerabilities, because at least from the medical profession, for example, we learn that multiple occasions where you're asking someone to repeat a family history, for example, will generate recall of a certain thing that you may have missed the last time. And one of the ways in which they're trying to bridge that is to find less intimidating ways of asking for that information, not with these onerous long forms or these long interviews, but trying to glean it through casual conversation. So I'm just sort of wondering whether or not your intake has adapted to sort of bridge that whole gap between how do we not have them repeat and relive the trauma, but make sure we don't miss really essential stuff that's going to allow us to provide better support.
Here, come on up.
So I'm gonna add only, from my experience, we have like in the community outreach program, we have a ETO system that each worker has like to put a touch point with whatever happened in the, like, you know, the service or the like appointment when we meet the client. So the next worker, when she's gonna meet the client, she doesn't have to go through all the question again. She only reads a touch point, like summary, and she know already what's been asked and what's missing, documents or like question. So not every time we have to repeat the same questions.
Got it. So at the very least, each successive person is learning from the previous person
yes.
who had a touch there, so they can use their own professional
Next.
judgment to determine what else do I need to know.
Yes.
And with the point of contact, let's say for Dina, she's the point of contact for certain families. They don't go to other people, they go directly to Dina, you know, and she's the holder of that family's story, so to speak. And then she represents them in these meetings so that she knows I go to this person for that, I go to this person for that, and now I'm going to take it back to the family and help them do the work to get into the services, right?
Yes. So if they have like a question about housing or childcare or like a medical question, they come to me first, and then I connect the other person in different department. I get the question, I go back to the client, explain to them, and we start from there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. I think we will have more questions, but maybe we can,
Yeah,
I know there's a
let's-
second part to this. and I wanna-
Exactly, so
Yep,
let me
go
bring
ahead.
up Ann Borderbergy again.
Okay, so the lessons are continually learned through this whole 200 Bridges demonstration, which is now 3 years old. So it's not that we just started with a safety net fix and then jumped into this. We're continually learning, so things are happening along the way. Legal Services of Northern Virginia was brought in to screen all families on a systematic basis for possible cases for status or pathways to citizenship. The housing grants folks realized that pursuing child support enforcement wasn't always in the best interests of the household, so that was flexed and lifted. So another thing we continue to observe is people forgoing promotions or better jobs or taking on more skill building because they're going to lose their benefits if their income goes up, and they're walking a tightrope. So we wanted to really dig in on this, the cliff effect, which is the phenomenon where people lose their benefits faster than they can earn more income. So what we did was we worked really hard with the DHS eligibility staff in every single area and modeled for a scenario, a single mom with 2 kids, a very typical situation. She has Section 8 housing. She's in an apartment with Section 8. She is a U.S. citizen in this case. She needs childcare so she can go to work. She has 1 full-time job. So we gathered the information, and then Urban Institute modeled it for us over time as her income rises, and then adjusted the benefits accordingly with the help of the DHS staff. They also took it to their tax institute. She does get earned income tax credit and child tax credits, which are very important, but not enough. So we put it together in a very small video, and so we're going to show it to you now.
I grew up here in Arlington. When I was in high school, I had to drop out to help my parents with the rent. Now I'm on my own. I'm a single mom with a 10-month-old and a 4-year-old. I work full-time making $10 an hour, and I don't have any other source of income. I qualify for public assistance, which helps with our housing, childcare, food, and medical insurance. After I cover transportation, clothes, personal care, and household supplies, I'm left with less than $400 each month to pay off my loans, my cell phone, and do things like take the kids out for ice cream. What if I get a flat tire or get sick and miss days of work? I want to get out of poverty for my kids. Watch what happens as I begin to earn more. The horizontal axis in this graph shows my income as it increases. The vertical axis shows my spending power after I pay for our basics. The red line is where I make just enough to make ends meet at the end of every month. You can see that after I got a raise from $7.25 to $10 per hour last month, I have a little more to spend each month. I need to keep going to move forward. Let's say I manage to increase my income to $15 an hour in the next couple of years. I'm now making just over $31,000. I lose my food stamps and my Medicaid, and my childcare copays go way up. It turns out to be one step forward, many steps back. Now I know what they mean by falling off the cliff. I'm $725 short for just covering the basics every month. Getting extra food at the food bank and donated school supplies and clothing from churches helps, but it's not enough. Should I even take this leap? Should I move away? Where could I go? I grew up here and my parents still need my help. My son loves his school. As my salary increases even higher, my childcare and housing benefits disappear at a quicker rate. I managed to get my GED and several promotions. At $20 an hour, I'm making over $41,000. I've doubled what I earn. But I'm even deeper in the hole. Do I take a second job? Who will keep the kids at night? I'd never be home for them. Should I rent out my second bedroom? Then I risk losing my rental assistance. At $30 an hour, I'm making $62,000. I no longer qualify for housing assistance, and I need to cover rent and utilities. My youngest is still in before and after care at school, but I only get a very small discount. My spending power is negative $227 each month, less than when I made $10 an hour cleaning offices. I've tripled my salary, but I still need help just to get by. Something as simple as a flat tire can still push me over the edge. My kids are in middle and high school now. I'm making $35 an hour, over $72,000. I'm finally self-sufficient, paying off my debts and starting to save for my retirement and college for the kids. But how am I going to get from $10 an hour to $35 an hour? Let's work together to bridge this gap.
I think you may need to turn your mic back on, sorry.
And the next slide. So, these are the affordability pressures and the impossible calculus that we're trying to address through a variety of economic mobility initiatives. You've heard us talking about our shared prosperity work that the Community Foundation has launched into over the last couple of years with help from national partners like Kresge and the Urban Institute. And the goal there is to really, that word again, scale up resources and really get more investment and buy-in from the business sector in the process of scaling up, and also to engage you, the county, in that process as well. And just based on the nationwide best practices around economic mobility and what we see here in Arlington, we've chosen to focus on deeply affordable housing, deeply affordable childcare, and living wages and workforce development issues. And those are all things that are in the works and in the mix, and they honor a lot of work over the past 10 or 15 years in Arlington, and more work to be done. The newest effort that we're making in this public-private partnership with DHS is around guaranteed income. And the idea behind the guaranteed income work is to help with economic mobility while countering the benefits cliff. So we can go on to the next slide. I do want to say, just before I go any further, that on that cliff effect modeling, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about it when we pause again, but we worked really hard to get gut checks from people across the safety net and from residents, gut checked that story, gut checked that pattern and that dynamic, and again and again, it's affirmed by all kinds of different stories and data points that that is a very accurate portrayal of the bind. So that's important as informing us and motivating us. So anyway, we have launched in the past month what we call Arlington's Guarantee. And it's a collaboration, as usual, between DHS and the foundation. It is a guaranteed income project that will support eventually 200 households, not the same 200 and 200 bridges. There is some overlap, but there's always often confusion there. But 200 households with $500 a month for 18 months. And the foundation and DHS are really working closely hand in hand on this. We are working feverishly to raise funds for this. We have hired 2 new staff with a grant from Kresge, which is giving us operational support for this work. So we have 2 new staff that are really dedicated to this effort, and then myself. We have the Urban Institute as technical support around the evaluation. Our lead evaluator is the one and only Michael Dharma Irwin and her team. DHS is such a, we're so fortunate because all of the data, as we talked about earlier, is shared and housed, and there's a lot of opportunity there to filter and pull and report outcomes from the DHS database. We've co-designed tools that will allow us, and Michael Dharma will be going into that detail about how we track outcomes. So DHS is very much in this in a major way. And
I'm fine. I am.
I'm just glad it wasn't me. So DHS and nonprofit staff across the safety net are also invested in this, and you'll be hearing more about that. So one of the biggest lifts has been protecting the benefits. We would not have gone down this path, and we didn't want to start unless we knew that the benefits of the cash recipients, the cash, would not lose their benefits. So we worked for a year with the State Department of Social Services to get the understanding and get it in writing that there is a way to protect people's Medicaid, food stamps, TANF, child care subsidies, child support, if it's already set, the amount is already in place. So those benefits are protected, so that as long as eligibility staff know not to code it differently, then it is protected and they won't lose benefits. This is non-taxable income from the IRS standpoint. So the housing grants, since that's a local program, that will not be lost because we have the ability locally to protect that, and there's work been done on that. Would you mind, let's see, we're also part of several communities of practice. So nationally, there's a guaranteed income community of practice, which has been incredibly useful. There are a few communities that are ahead of us, Stockton, California, one in Mississippi, actually quite a few pilots have popped up in California, and now there's hundreds around the country. And so we've benefited from learning and seeing some promising outcomes from those ahead of us, and we are sharing with those that are in it now or starting up. Locally, there are several jurisdictions that are looking at this too. Alexandria, Fairfax, and DC have secured government dollars for this, but they're still working on their designs. DC had you might have read about the DC Thrive Collaborative, which was more of a pandemic-focused 5-month initiative for cash for 5 months with a collaborative group of nonprofits in DC.
All right. So the details about Arlington's Guarantee. We'll be serving 200 families, all people with children under 18, since we're trying to have 2-generation impacts. Most of those families, 150 of them, will be from the housing grant recipients. There's a couple of reasons why that seemed like the ideal population. One is they have housing stability and they have employment, so they're positioned for mobility. They can really use this funding to take the next step for their families. And the other is, as Anne mentioned, that because of the work that's been done to protect the housing grant and ensure that they wouldn't lose eligibility, we don't have to worry about making up for that loss. It's not like people who are receiving housing choice voucher, which would not be protected. We have carve-outs for two special populations. One is residents returning from incarceration, and the other is individuals with immigration status challenges. The reason why we're focusing on those two populations, about 25 people each, is because through 200 Bridges, we found that they face different challenges than our other low-income residents, and we think they'll have a different path to mobility. We want to make sure that we have learning for those populations as well. The amount of money they'll be receiving is $500 a month for 18 months. That amount was set after reviewing what other programs are doing and also taking into consideration that we're protecting benefits, so we don't have to offset a major loss. The average housing grant working family income in 2021 was $27,130 a year. So $500 a month is an extra 22% of income for that family. It should make a big difference for them. Finally, they're going to have access to 200 Bridges and trained mobility coaches. We want to make sure that they have supports to achieve their goals. We're not just giving them money and letting them go off on their own. They can opt into receiving additional support if they want to. For 200 Bridges, they would go through the same process that we've outlined earlier in the presentation. And for coaching, we have access to Brian Marakitkin here. He is a National Urban Fellow and lifelong Arlington resident. He started out with his involvement in the county through the Teen Network Board. And for the past 13 years, he's been working on economic mobility programming, most recently as a senior director at Lyft. So he's developed a coaching model for us based on Lyft and also based on an organization called Empath and their mobility mentoring curriculum. So far, he's already trained 10 staff members to implement this coaching model, including DHS, nonprofit staff, and a dedicated resource that Arlington Thrive has devoted to this effort, who'll be providing coaching for our families. For the evaluation plan, obviously this cash pilot is a resource to our families now, but it's also a great resource for us to learn about what works and about what doesn't work, so to inform future efforts. So we designed an evaluation plan with the Urban Institute. We reviewed what other jurisdictions were doing, looked at validated assessments, and drafted a 30-minute evaluation survey that includes about 50 questions with their input. The random selection of participants is an important part of this model. By randomly selecting households, we're ensuring fair participation and representation of the full diversity of households who could participate. We also have a comparison group. So in addition to our 200 families who are receiving cash, we'll have 100 families who are just taking a survey at baseline and every 6 months. Those families will help us understand how this assistance is making a difference as compared to everything else that's going on in the world. Families are also receiving enhanced child tax credits. They're influenced by COVID-related factors. So there are a lot of other confounding factors, and having a comparison group will help us distinguish them. The survey will be telephonic. Families will complete it at enrollment, and every 6 months. They'll receive a gift card for participation because it is a substantial portion of time they're spending with us. We want to acknowledge that. And the survey is very comprehensive. It assesses basic needs such as food stability, housing stability. It assesses their mental and physical well-being. It includes a lot of mobility-related questions such as career development, savings, adult education, and it includes demographics such as race, ethnicity, and zip code so that we can segment results later on and see what's working for different parts of our population. The outcomes that we anticipate seeing will probably align with what we've seen in other pilots. Some of the ones we've highlighted here are what we've seen in the Stockton, California pilot, which happened pre-COVID, and the Magnolia Mothers Trust, which actually occurred during COVID. They saw things like reduction in income volatility. A lot of our families rely on gig work and other inconsistent opportunities. This $500 a month will give them consistent income so they can have stability and plan for the future. They saw an increase in paying bills on time and saving money for emergencies. Magnolia Mothers Trust saw increases of about 50% in both those domains, which is a great asset for our families. They saw an increase in full employment. The assistance gave them bandwidth to pursue a better paying job. In Stockton, the percentage of people fully employed increased 22%. They were more likely to have health insurance coverage and seek medical care for acute and chronic illnesses. The Magnolia Mothers Trust saw an increase of 25 to 30% in those domains. There were significant decreases in anxiety and improvements in well-being. And there was an increase in participants who completed high school diplomas. We are hoping that this cash will give them the bandwidth to pursue education. The Magnolia Mothers Trust saw 22% more families completing their high school diploma by the end of the program.
So as I said earlier, we have raised the first $500,000 of the $2 million budget. The $200,000 of that is also already in place through Kresge for the operating costs. So that means the vast majority of the budget goes straight directly to the households. It's a total of $1.3 million, of which $500,000 we have raised and are already. We've already given out the first 50 households cards. We're continually doing outreach to both corporate donors and private donors, anxiously hoping to raise the rest. And we, hope to stay in touch with you and update you every 6 months or so at your invitation to let you know how it's doing. We've done a lot of work around changing the narrative. That's an effort that's going on nationally, just changing the narrative around people in poverty. As Anita said, poverty is not a personal failure. It's a full-time job, just being poor and managing all these resources and going everywhere to get every little need met. So we're really working on providing this no strings attached money, letting people, trusting them to know how to spend the money the way they need to, and knowing that it's reliable. One of you pointed out that the reliability and the consistency of knowing this is coming for every month for 18 months is a wonderful, important aspect of this. So thank you very much. Did you have any more?
I think all of us will want to say thank you to each of you for the work, and perhaps none more than those sort of at the granular level of Ms. Abdelghani and Ms. Irwin, but also, of course, Ms. Tireless, Ms. Friedman, and also Ms. Bordebergy, but there's more out there. So open the floor to questions if folks have them. And you don't have to make them up if you don't at this point, but go ahead, Ms. Garvey.
Well, sort of a small question, which I'll take up where you left off, although first, I just think this is really exciting. I'm so thrilled to see this happening, and I'm really looking forward to it. And thinking ahead, what if we get to the 18 months and then the money's gone and you've got all of these families and we're talking about reliability and stability? Are we going to pull the rug out? I don't expect you to maybe have the answer now, but I assume you're thinking about it, and as we get to the end of this pilot, we'll do more thinking, because I really would be I think we'd all be uncomfortable getting families just on the verge. I mean, that's the whole point, right? And we want to instill trust in people. So any thoughts you have on that would be great.
Well, that is always a concern. And I think with all the services that we provide, there's always a question mark as to their ability to be continued based on the economic situation that we face as a county or as a government. Of course, as you saw with our cliff effect, $500 is not going to make someone free from poverty. The $500, though, will, for a certain period of time, and people know that it's time limited, alleviate a lot of stress. I think some of our initial already experiences or anecdotal experiences of people receiving the cards, there's just immense relief and joy about knowing that they're involved in the pilot. But it is a concern, of course. Guaranteed income programs are becoming more and more widespread across the country. There's a mayor's initiative in counties that have mayors for guaranteed income. So we'll see what the future holds.
If I could just add, Michael Dharma mentioned that people who get the cash are offered a one-on-one coach. It's not required, but the notion is that this is a temporary, it's 18 months, and if you'd like some help thinking about what this opportunity brings, what plans you might want to make, whether it's getting your GED, paying off debt. Take one woman just today who got her card is really anxious to dial back a little bit on the number of hours she's working so that she can get her GED and then go into the nursing certificate program. So the coaching is hopefully going to maximize, if people want it, to maximize the opportunity while they have it.
Yeah, thank you. And then I assume we'll have, and I'll yield the floor, thinking about how, if we want to make this program sustainable, how are we going to pay for it and who's going to pay for it? But lots of big questions. I'm glad we've taken this first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carvey. This time, Mr. Dorsey, and then we'll go to others.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I'm glad that we're doing this work. It's interesting. The country seems to periodically want to look at new models for how we meet this critical issue. Negative income tax was, I guess now 40 years ago, was something that we studied and looked at. And we still haven't perfected the right system, but I love that we're trying to do something, at least within our own swim lane, to see if we can improve circumstances. The question concerns the business community and your outreach to them. Just full disclosure, my opinion, one of the ways in which we're swimming upstream is that the value of work is not rewarded with sufficient wages. And as much as I am very much supportive of their efforts in this regard, fundamentally, really what we need are for people's work to be rewarded with income commensurate with what they contribute and what they need to live. And so I'm curious as to what level the engagement of the partners that you've identified sees that as an essential need, and whether or not that's also an area of interest for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Absolutely. This guaranteed income is one of many strategies, and it doesn't supplant, it complements public assistance at this point. But to your point, living wage, that movement is paying people a living wage is just a critical piece. And we certainly are looking at that with our shared prosperity work and the national partners that we're involved in. And I'm not an expert in what the business community I know there are two sides to this argument. Some fear that it will drive work against them if they pay more in wages, and others see the need. So we see both. It's an important argument and an important place to put some focus.
Well, if you encounter anyone who believes that the research indicates that higher wages will somehow reduce employment, send them to me. We can talk.
Love to.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Karantonis, then we'll come to you, Ms. Crystal. Go ahead.
Again, thank you for starting all this, and I know how difficult it is to gather money first and to pull up. I personally have to tell you that I don't believe that the economic cliff is addressable with this. These are two completely different things. The cliff is a systemic problem of the way we provide assistance. It is conditioned assistance, it is conditioned to income, etc. And you know better than I that what we are doing here is basically to alleviate the absolute, the poorest of the poor, those who have absolutely, who are at a permanent who are below the existence minimum. And we're trying to get them closer. So therefore, that means that I still believe, even beyond the discussion about livable wages, that we need to have this kind of, the idea or the system of that kind of support it has to become systemic at some point. And it has to be there because this is what the safety net is for. Eventually, what is unfair is that somebody is employed and poor at the same time. Yeah. But there will be people who are not employed and therefore poor and therefore have to be supported and made whole as members of our community. So one question I have for you is how this 100 comparison family system will work. I understand that just plus or minus $500 is one of many variables. This is not the only variable that changes in the life of people. So how to exactly do we, is it reasonable, or is it just enough to report on success or failure, I believe, success of the program?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Our goal in having a comparison group is to have families who have many characteristics in common with the families getting the cash assistance. So they're also taken from the housing grants, from the special carve-out populations that we're targeting, randomly selected, and they're invited to participate in the same evaluation surveys that the cash assistance participants receive. So our hope is that if we see that, in 6 months, more of the cash assistance recipients are connected to health care, we can see it's the same pattern present in our comparison families, or are they not getting connected? At 12 months, what are the differences? It won't be a perfect comparison because, as you said, there's individual variability. But our hope is that by having a substantial group of 100 people, we'll have enough to be able to discern patterns. It's not like a randomized control trial, but it's just sort of a way of trying to learn a little bit more about what's causing the changes that we're seeing.
Fair. Thank you.
Ms. Crystal.
Thank you. Sort of similar to Mr. Karantonis' line of questioning, and let me just start by stipulating, I think, particularly in this moment, anything that gets more resources into the hands of our low-income families with as few additional levels of certification and paperwork required is absolutely worth doing. And so I think it's worth doing in its own regard. And I think in some ways you brought us a really appealing and well-designed orange, and I'm about to ask you why it's not an apple. But this in some way gestures at universal basic income, right? And I think Director Freeman indicated there is national interest in that. And the way I understand it, universal basic income really has sort of 3 potential benefits, at least in terms of the economic gains that accrue to all of us when it's provided, right? It is a considerably more effective provision of services because it essentially proposes to replace all of the expensive and difficult work that we were just talking about, right? Of connecting people to services, getting them all qualified. It replaces the need for those data integration systems because it just replaces all of that with one check. It allows for individuals to maximize their utility, which is not only an economic gain, but it really, I think, speaks to the idea of respect for and dignity of those living in poverty to make their own decisions and to not be paternalistic, which you all talked about. And then it spurs good long-run decision-making, right? Because you know this cliff isn't coming for you anymore. I respect, because generally we do things and we pilot things in a relatively cautious manner, that this has been sort of tried to design down in a way that's cautious. But it seems to me it's so cautious that we're not going to realize any of those effects or any of those benefits, right? Because we're going to have to maintain all of our complicated certification and case management systems because people are still getting, the network of housing grants, food assistance, and so forth. It's to some extent people can maximize their economic utility with $500, but not with the full panoply of assistance. And I do worry a little bit to Ms. Garvey's question about, if the goal is to help people make good long-run decisions. That's such a compelling. The cliff effect video, if I know that I'm still going to fall off that cliff in 18 months, right, I'm probably not going to engage in that long-run competition for a raise or upskilling or getting my CDA to become a lead teacher at a childcare center or so forth. So I guess that the question I have is, are we missing a chance to think bigger with this? What would it look like? Did you all consider to say we're actually not going to pilot a $500 a month supplement? We are going to pilot for some amount of families for the indefinite future, replacing the full panoply of assistance with something like universal basic income, and see how it affects their decision making and our need as safety net providers for all of that scaffolding and infrastructure.
I'll let Ann speak more about how we got to the amount that we got to. Of course, we would like to do more, but we are piloting, and pilots start out small to glean lessons and see what works and what doesn't work, and then to be scaled. We don't have indefinite resources. I think when you think about, you and I have had many conversations about trust-based relationships, with nonprofits and with the residents. And this is an area where we're basically acknowledging it is tough to live in Arlington, And even in spite of the good efforts of the government to have things like housing grants, which is very unique, it's not enough. We want to help this people stay in Arlington and feel that Arlington cares about them and trusts them to make the decisions about the use of the money. So,
But if I could just, that's exactly what I'm proposing, right? The idea is instead of saying, we're going to give you housing grants and food assistance and we value you, so $500 more, which good, right, on it, but like, what would it mean to say, we know that we are spending, say, I'm going to kind of pull a number out of a hat based roughly on what I know about housing grants, food assistance. We know we're spending about $2,000 a month on you and your family. We're just going to give you that, right? Like we'll have that savings on an ongoing basis because our housing grants program is now, shrunk by the caseload of one.
it's definitely an idea. I mean, I worked in international development for 20 years. I often thought, let's abolish USAID and split up the money and give out the checks. We could probably accomplish just as much, but it's not within my bailiwick or policy-making role to do that. But Ann, go ahead and.
Well, I couldn't agree with Anita more about everything she just said. But also this guaranteed income community of practice that we participate in, Michael Dharma and I, it's a monthly group, it's 2.5 hours. There are almost 200 pilots around the country participating, and there's a great deal of shared wisdom, and it's a movement. And there's often talk of the tension between the macro and the micro. So the place we're in is the micro, the pilot, the demonstration, the showing people they're valued here, and doing what we can. And at the macro level, they're working furiously, the Economic Security Project, which is sort of the umbrella organization behind all this with large national foundations behind them. Doing work on legislation, we hear about, in an embargoed way, we hear about legislation that's being worked on at the state and national level around. They're very careful to say this isn't universal basic income because it's specifically to reset people in poverty. So it's not everyone gets the same amount, it's people who are below a certain level get an amount. They also ask that rhetorical question of, why don't we just take everything we pay for services and give it to people? But that's clearly not going to work at this point because there are so many things that just money can't help with. It's really complicated, so it's complementary. As far as our local bandwidth, the Community Foundation, we're a very small organization, so we tend to try to work hard to demonstrate something that looks important and worth testing, and then work toward thinking about scaling up in a way that's commensurate or manageable. The living wage piece, Christian, is definitely on a big part of this group, this community of practice, and there's a lot of people obviously working on this at a larger macro level.
If I could just add something
Sure,
to that.
go ahead.
Ms. Crystal, appreciate your asking that, and it strikes me that the people to have in the room for that conversation also include our state delegates, includes our members of Congress and our senators, because unfortunately, exactly what you would describe, if we were to want to do that tomorrow, would then create the circumstances where people become ineligible for other supports, which are currently a part of what makes it work. And, we can maybe substitute all of our local dollars for cash, but that would come at the risk of losing federal and state dollars. And this is a system that is so, I won't editorialize and say it's by design, but it's so effective in keeping people exactly where they are. And we are, unfortunately, despite our desires, best wishes, we are not able to overcome all of that. So I just want to put in a plug for I want to join you in that conversation, making sure we get all those people in the room.
Yeah, I think it is worth exploring, and I thought you were actually going to say the people in the room are these guys, because I think that would be fair, right? This is a policy level decision. I mean, I guess I haven't entirely given up the idea that there is something that could look like a universal pilot of this. I mean, as I said, especially the moment that we're in with the pandemic, getting more resources into people's hands, I can do nothing but fully support. I'm also sure that we are going to find that $500 of unconditional cash grants are going to help families, as it should, right? What I would really love to find is there a way that we make that even more sustainable and don't just layer it over an existing system that this group of people has been doing their darndest to fix and improve with all of the sort of interagency cooperation and multi-sector cooperation. But, you know, true sustainability, I think, would be trying to get the resources that we do control into the hands of the people who need them most and looking at where we are maybe in our own way too, instead of just learning, which we know that $500 a month is of course going to help people, right? So I guess I haven't entirely given up on that, though I do appreciate your point about, you know, even if we were to just change our local programs and reallocate, say, you know, 5% of housing grants into cash grants, could that impact our Section 8 programs, for example? You know, and you know, money instead of childcare, what does that do for the state VDSS, childcare subsidy eligibility? So I appreciate the point that like untangling that knot is challenging. But I guess I just want to make sure we don't lose the opportunity to if there is room for experimentation for us as Arlington County to do it.
Well, I think we can definitely come back in 6 months and have another conversation to tell you what we have learned and how it's going.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
So a couple of different thoughts. I mean, granularly, the point on data integration and social work duplication, concerns about that resonate. A long time ago, I lived in San Francisco, and Gavin Newsom put forward a Care Not Cash proposal, which I voted for. And I just think the universe of benefits in that time at San Francisco was far different, even from the safety net that we proposed. So I would want to look back at that. And I think it had some good outcomes. I do think legislatively, I rarely, if ever, have associated with Ronald Reagan, but he did like the earned income tax credit and loved the earned income tax credit before he lost it as an idea somehow. So I'd be interested in our legislative package if we might see if it was possible to do and there's reasonable economic concerns about a local earned income tax credit. But at least I'd love to talk with you colleagues about that over time. On the pilot, do we know as yet whether, because it's a pilot and because of the data that we saw on the bridges work, I'll be interested in whether, is that something that is ARPA funds eligible, or do we know yet? Or is that something that we could look into? I guess it's a county attorney type question.
My understanding of the criteria under ARPA is that it would be eligible.
Okay, I just didn't know. I didn't know for sure, and so I just wanted to kind of check. And then I think I can't leave, and I know I see you, Ms. Garvey, you want to add, you know, reiterating the thanks to each of you for bringing this forward, and then also Ms. Cowan for all your work in trying to help make this happen. I just think it's appropriate. I know there's been a lot of time discussing it, but I think this is a fruitful conversation, and I appreciate everybody for bringing it forward. Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. I should have let you conclude, Mr. Chair, but I just realized we're out of time. But I love the conversation with Mr. Dorsey and Ms. Crystal here about, you know, looking at this differently. Mr. Dorsey, I will say every system is set up to get exactly the results it gets, whether it's intentional or not. That's the truth. And I find myself just having two thoughts, well, three. One, I think it's really exciting that we are part of a national movement because we're going to be getting a lot of data and a lot of ideas. Two, I think this system that's been getting these results is incredibly complex. It makes me think of, like, pick up sticks is one old-fashioned game. I mean, these, you know, you can pull out little things, but the whole thing will fall down if you're not really careful. So as we try to sort of transition to something else, we got to be careful we don't collapse the whole thing. So that's one caution about moving too fast. And then the other is that I realized we can't just pull out all the money we're spending on social services, because a lot of people are in these positions because they have mental health issues that haven't been dealt with. They have health issues that haven't been dealt with, and they're going to need some sort of support to get through that. So those are 3 points that probably are not the best concluding remarks, but thank you for letting me share those. Thanks a lot.
No problem. Thank you for the conversation. At one point, I clearly was bowled over based on the glass that I knocked over. But I'm really just very grateful for this, and appreciate so much both the conceptual discussion and also the hard work that you're doing, Ms. Abdelghani, and thank you both at the heart of it. And also, I'll be interested, perhaps we can follow up on the continuance of the bridges work, because there were some scale-up questions there. But to each of you, a big thanks for a great conversation. With that, well, unless Ms. Friedman has any divine wisdom.
Thank you very much for letting us have this opportunity.
Sure. Thank you. With that, we're adjourned. Thanks so much.